Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel, NFL Week 10, Monday Night Football edition. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider.
Top of the morning to you, kind sir.
You know, Payne, yesterday afternoon, probably about 3 o'clock Pacific time, I tried to figure out if I could rent a car and drive it into a generator around Allegiant Stadium, but I wasn't sure if that was going to be best for my long-term future in this business.
It was not a positive weekend. Thank God for golf, though. If the Masters could be played every weekend, that specific course, be never a need to bet anything ever again.
Every now and again, things tend to go according to plan, and so while things on the links went the right way, the gridiron was not as forgiving. Wonder how that game would have played out differently if Drew Lock actually had his touchdown called back at the end of the first half. But alas, wrong side. We move on after a struggling weekend of best bets. But Payne, when we look back on what we saw for the NFL Week 10, last night's result arguably one of the more surprising, I think, towards the casual fan, seeing Baltimore lose outright as a 6.5, 7-point favorite. We saw professional money come in all week on New England. You and I weren't quite sure how the matchup was going to play out, but as we've seen time and time again, you brought it up. Mother Nature smiled kindly upon Bill Belichick in New England in a primetime spot.
Yes. Sharp money was on New England. Thankfully kept me off the game because there wasn't a positive matchup there pregame. But New England's offensive line was getting the push they needed. No Calais Campbell. And they dominated the trenches and got the ground game going and shortened it. And then, as you alluded to and we joked about before this podcast, any big game at home New England has, it seems like Belichick gets help from the heavens. There's weather every big game they play at home. It's crazy. And we joked about this a little bit before, but once they got up 10, then it starts just like teaming. And then 3 seconds after the game, it just stops.
Yeah, just they goes, all right, we're done. Our job here is done. We're finished raining on Baltimore's parade for their 92nd ill-fated attempt to try and win that game 24-23. Sure, 3 minutes later, done. Front clears out, and it's clear skies.
It's a really tough game to watch. I don't know what Baltimore is doing offensively. Sure, some teams have started to figure some things out, but what are you doing? What was Mark Ingram doing there? What was the plan there on 4th and an inch, having Mark Ingram line up in rain 7 yards deep in the backfield without a blocking back? Certainly wasn't going to be a threat to throw it there. So what was the plan of attack? We're going to have him line up 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage when New England's got 8 guys in the box? So they have to figure out how to run block a little bit better. I don't know how that's going to work, right? You lose your all-world guard, Marshall Yanda, to retirement. Your $98 million left tackle is out for the season. And then Nick Boyle, one of the best blocking tight ends in the league, looks like he has a serious leg injury as well. So I don't know what that's going to mean here for the Ravens offense moving forward, but not the best of things going on up front for the Ravens run game.
Well, and the other thing, too, was you watched the Ravens game last weekend, and all they talked about was, Matt Skura, he's got a cut on his finger, and that's the problem with the snap. Well, it must be a nasty cut because he didn't snap the ball a hell of a lot better yesterday against the Patriots.
It was wet. It was wet out. Give him a break, Todd. He's got no finger. It's raining.
It was wet. Both teams play on the same field in the same elements, and yet every single time we see it, it doesn't matter who's under center for the New England Patriots. They seem to come in better prepared. Big win for New England to keep them semi-relevant in the AFC. Baltimore, a major revenge game this coming weekend against the Tennessee Titans. We'll see if they're able to right some of their wrongs and put themselves in better position as far as the playoff seeding is concerned. Because if you drop a game to the Titans and you follow it up with a loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers, suddenly we're not talking about Baltimore even contending for a division anymore, and I think that ship's already sailed. We're talking about Baltimore just fighting to stay playoff relevant.
That's why last night's game was big, because if you win last night, you can split the next 2 games, and then you look at the schedule after that, there's not much there. So Baltimore's actually got a really good schedule down the stretch. It was just this little 3-game clump of games here that if they could have somehow managed to get 2-1 in that 3 games, they would have been smooth sailing, because the schedule really lets up after that.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see, as Lamar Jackson mentioned throughout the course of the week, hey, look, defenses are figuring us out. Well, if that's the case, whether it's true or not, you have to be more creative offensively, and Baltimore didn't show a whole heck of a lot of that in any particular form or fashion. But as we do every Monday, we break down not only some of the things that we saw in terms of individual games, but overall individual and team performances. Payne, what did you see that really impressed you in the surprisingly good category over the weekend?
Let's start with the Bucs. I thought that was a very good performance, kind of salty. We didn't have a little position there, and I get it overall, right? This is a team that we think is a contender, that's a championship team, and they're going against a rebuilding Panthers squad. But I think you have to like what you saw. It was pretty impressive. And Tom and the offense rebounded. It looked like they had a plan of attack, 7.1 yards per play overall, 53% passing success rate, 9 explosives on the day. And you look, the ball was spread out. 8 players caught a pass. And then finally the Buccaneers defense woke up after a rough start. Final 3 quarters, if you break that game down, Tampa's defense held Carolina to 72 total yards, 2.2 a play, 1.4 per pass attempt, and a 19% success rate with 0 explosive passes the final 3 quarters for Carolina's offense. Once the script wore off, I know me and you were texting back and forth, the Teddy Bridgewater started out, but once the script wore off and then after the Ronald Jones fumble, Tampa's defense basically got back to who we thought they were. They'd played about, I would say, 9 horrific quarters of football, but they got some things going there defensively, so hopefully the mojo is back at this point.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll, of course, get Tampa on full display a week from today when they play host to the Los Angeles Rams in what should be an outstanding Monday Night Football game between 2 teams that have aspirations, obviously, of making deep runs in the playoffs. For me, Payne, albeit it came in a loss, but I think Alex Smith in his first start in eternity, throwing for 390 yards, leading a comeback down 24-3. Pretty impressive. For the Washington football team, not quite sure what they're doing late with Chase Young taking that ill-advised 15-yard penalty that leads to Matt Prater hitting a game-winning 59-yard field goal. But Washington overall offensively, yes, they get full marks for racing that deficit, but I'm not quite sure what they're doing in the first quarter and a half to even find themselves behind the 8 ball, necessitating having to score 21 unanswered to make that game competitive.
Yeah, that's right. Another slow start offensively. I think potentially this week moving forward, they may come out with a better game plan offensively. They might start throwing the ball a little bit more. But you're right, they got behind, and then they played catch-up. 4.3 yards per play in the first half, 6.7 in the second half. This just seems what Matt Patricia's defense does. I think if they lose that game, you fire Matt Patricia on the spot. Like, you can't blow another 21-point lead at home as a defensive-minded head coach. At that point, I think you just shit-can him. So I honestly, I'm not saying this, he probably wasn't going to lose his job, but I would have fired him if they lost that game.
What do you see when you watch those games? What do you see the Lions do differently when they have such big leads? Is it the fact they get more conservative? Are they not bringing pressure? Is it overall, hey, look, we're going to relax? I mean, I'm not quite sure how to even put my finger on how one team, not named the Atlanta Falcons, can blow so many big leads in the second half.
So it's a little bit of both. Darrell Bevel goes into just a touch of a shell offensively, but just speaking to the defensive standpoint, it's not a great secondary. So once teams are actually forced to throw the ball, it's right into the weakness of the Lions. And they do get a little conservative. They start dropping more guys. They go to their zone. Just not good. It's not a good defense. You got to figure out, like, we go back and forth about this all the time, but I maintain and I pound the table that if your head coach has a specific trait and the team sucks at that trait, and your team isn't the identity of its head coach, it's probably time to move on. And I think that's probably going to be the case here. Obviously, a big win for the Lions. It at least presents the idea that they're still in it. I don't think they truly are. But that's the overall issue there. The defense struggles a little bit, and I get you're out your middle linebacker to start the game, and you've had some injuries there throughout the course of the season on the defensive side of the ball, but it's just not a good effort. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't realize that there was enough time for the offense to charge down the field and kick a late field goal. I turned the game off. I was like, I'm not going to watch this overtime game between these two. I'm going to the Dolphins game, watching Tua.
There really
but then I
wasn't
just saw
enough time.
the highlight there where they banged home the big field goal.
I mean, I think they had one successful play and a 15-yard penalty, and then all of a sudden Matt Prater hits the ball from the moon. I think it was a Chase Young 15-yard roughing the passer penalty after the Lions had completed one pass. So I was kind of the same mindset. Flip back, see them lining up for the field goal, and the ageless wonder they're just banging the ball through the uprights from nearly 60 yards without blinking. So pretty impressive for Detroit to go from catbird seat to looking like they were going to piss that game away to ultimately winning. And what's interesting about that, Detroit ending up with 3 points to the good wasn't enough to get them to the window, especially from the early number that we saw sharp money at 5.5, 5, 4.5, and 4 on the underdog that looked to be dead and buried. But you mentioned Tua, and I guess you have to give the Miami Dolphins credit. Yet another victory, and the final score not probably as indicative of how dominant they were against Los Angeles Chargers.
Good start. Is that 3 in a row?
3 in a row to start his career.
Not too bad. That game is just, to me, the epitome of one team's buttoned up and coached well. The other team is simply not. Anthony Lynn has got to be fired. I feel like I'm calling for everyone's job today, but that's just really bad for me.
Come out aggressive. Look for heads to roll. We don't need to wait for Black Monday in the NFL. It can be Black Monday heading into Week 11.
I think it's Cyber Monday, is it not?
Well, I don't know if that's today. I don't know how all that stuff works. I'm not I don't buy gifts around the holidays. I'm like Scrooge.
I got you. Maybe that was last Monday. I don't know. Either way, Anthony Lynn needs to be fired. And you're watching that game play out, and you're listening to the commentators and the color analysts there, and like, we spoke to Anthony Lynn this week, and he's put a real emphasis on running the ball. You wouldn't say. I just don't understand what's going on here. You got to fire the guy. He's a former running back. He's a running back coach. He just wants to get the ground game going. And it doesn't matter. If it's Kalen Ballage, who's been cut 74 times and is your fifth string running back, you got to feed him the ball in his revenge game rather than let Justin Herbert chuck it around. But when you look at that game, I don't know what to make of it, because you get the backdoor touchdown to make it look like it's at least competitive. The Dolphins obviously get the punt block early in the game, but that game's easily a 3-score game if Ted Karras learns how to snap a ball for some reason. It's just an ugly game from the onset. But you're looking at right now a Chargers offense, 4.3 yards per play. Ran the ball a ton on early downs. The things that we had said that they had kind of transitioned to out of the bye, we were going to be a little bit more pass happy, happened for about 2 games, and then the identity of the head coach took over. And it just doesn't look like the OC has full command. You're seeing Anthony Lynn out there. He's got the headset on. He's got the play sheet in front of him. It's almost like he has input on what's going on, even though he's not the play caller. And that just needs to change, because the offense right now just isn't very good. That's the reality of the situation there. Anything else from the good on your end? I have one more, but I'll let you take charge.
I wasn't sure if you were going to call for anybody else's job, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to try and do that here.
Well, maybe Drew Brees'. A little famous Jameis action going on here.
Rest that rib cage, Drew. The Saints will need you for their playoff run. They won't need you right away. Interesting to see what comes out of those MRI results later today, knowing that he wasn't able to go in that second half, but still stayed out there with his team, helmet on, didn't look to be all that thrilled that Jameis was out there taking snaps against the 49ers. But sure, fire away. You can run with the good if there was anything else you'd like to add.
Well, let's stay there. Let's go with their defense, because the Saints' defense right now is trending upwards. Now, they've been good metrically all season, but there's a couple areas of their defense, whether there's third down defense, whether there's red zone defense, the ones that are kind of swingy and you can see improve. But right now, coming into this week, the Saints' defense had played a top 5 schedule of offenses. They were top 10 in efficiency, both against the run and pass. And then they go out and they added Quan Alexander. It was like this quiet trade that no one seemed to talk about. Helped big time in a game against his old team. So when I look at New Orleans right now, they're getting healthier along the defensive line with Davenport. You mentioned Drew Brees goes out. The defense basically at that point put the game on their shoulders and ended it. If you look past Kyle Shanahan's script, which we always talk about, and he had 2 weeks to, devise and prepare, New Orleans allowed 6 points the final 53 minutes. From the second quarter on, Kyle Shanahan's offense averaged 4.5 yards per play. San Fran couldn't get we'll just call it exotic, is probably the right name for San Fran's ground game, typically when it's a little bit healthier. But 2.8 yards per rush, a 23% rushing success rate the final 3 quarters. You pick off Nick Mullins twice after the opening quarter. I thought the Saints defense was fantastic. They settled in there, put the game on their shoulders. You alluded to this. We'll find out what the MRI comes back on Drew Brees. I'm hearing it's actually multiple things, the ribs, the shoulder. We touched on this last week, I think, before the Bucs game. There was a day, whether it was Wednesday or Thursday, I can't remember off the top of my head, that Brees had to operate off to the side without pads to throw. They're calling it a shoulder injury. So I don't know what's going on there, but he's clearly not 100%. We'll have to see how that plays out a little bit. But the Saints defense probably going to need to continue to play at this level if Drew Brees is going to be out a couple games. We'll see if that actually materializes.
Yeah, going to be real interesting to see how the market responds to grading them out. We know Jameis, obviously, plenty of experience as a starting quarterback. Obviously, the walking, talking human turnover and big play machine. But what's interesting about this, when you look at the Saints and their touchdown drives, I mean, none of them covered more than 60 yards. So while they were dominant in terms of what their defense was able to do, 27-13, you have to feel a little bit for folks that had the 49ers plus the points and thought they deserved a better fate, taking 10 in that particular spot. Anything else particularly good that you would like to include before we shift gears and go to the glass half empty?
Well, I'm going to hold one back because I know you want to bash Russell Wilson and the Seattle Seahawks. So I'm going to let you go, and then I'm going to counterpunch.
All right, well, you can counterpunch here, but I am going to take shots at Russell Wilson here, mainly for his decision-making. I mean, when you are the guy that has to be the calming influence for your team offensively, yes, he's down Carlos Hyde. Yes, he's down Chris Carson. Alex Collins, hey, another guy that's picked up off the street, fills in as a running back. Russ is, to me, over the last couple weeks, has tried to force too many balls and making too many big plays, or at least tried to. I know the Seattle Seahawks defense isn't exactly the 85 Bears or the 2000 Ravens, but when you look at Russ off a turnover, when Seattle does give you a short field and you have nothing but green grass or turf, whatever the hell it is at SoFi Stadium in front of you, you can't try and force a ball on the run throwing across your body into coverage. And you look at his interception late in the game as well. First contest where he didn't have a touchdown pass. So while it doesn't all fall on Russell Wilson, you're one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You have to be better, and you have to cherish the football because you've seen his turnover numbers continue to tick up, and it's no coincidence it's coincided with Seattle's recent slide.
Agree with all that. And that's why a couple weeks ago I say he's not the MVP. It's got to be Patty Mahomes, baby. Although Kyler's nipping at the heels all of a sudden.
I think Kyler with a big performance, and I know we'll talk about Thursday night. Kyler with a big performance, if they're able to sweep the season series against the Seahawks. Aaron Rodgers wasn't great against the Jags, but he's very much there. And Patty Mahomes, I think Russell Wilson goes from the catbird seat to now sitting in fourth, if you want my honest assessment.
You just want it to be anybody but Patty. You're just a hater. It's okay.
No, I don't. Oh, here we go. No, I think here's the thing. Patrick Mahomes suffers from the same thing that's kept LeBron James from winning more MVPs. You're not competing against the rest of the league. You're competing against yourself.
Yes, and sports writers who need something to talk about.
Right. They want the narrative. They want the storyline.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to go glass half full here because I actually thought the Rams defense was fantastic. They impressed me. I was regretting that the Rams didn't make the card. But the biggest thing, and nobody is talking about this right now, but I'm sure they will be pretty soon, is Brandon Staley. We knew absolutely nothing about LA's new defensive coordinator coming into the season. Absolutely nothing. Because we were even talking about this, like, who is this guy? And he was a positional linebackers coach for 2 seasons in the league prior behind Vic Fangio, and then all of a sudden he's a defensive coordinator. And this guy went from coaching, I believe, at John Carroll University to being the defensive coordinator for the Rams. But what I see from his defense right now is it's extremely versatile. And he's moving these parts around in the secondary, and it's making it difficult for teams to game plan. And we weren't sure if Ramsey was going to shadow DK yesterday because they kind of took that responsibility off his plate and were playing Ramsey more in the slot. because that allowed him to be a little bit more versatile because he's good in run stop. He can blitz a little bit, but they just had him, kind of in the slot. And we said, hey, but he's really the only guy size-wise that could match up with DK. Sure enough, me and you were texting here, and it's like, does DK have a catch?
I thought he was inactive in the first half.
For 2.5 quarters, DK didn't have a target. So, Jalen Ramsey just erased him from the game. But aside from this game, if you look at Brandon Staley making just ridiculous halftime adjustments, you think about this in comeback mode. The Rams hold Russell Wilson to 3.6 yards per play and a 39% success rate with 0 explosive passes in the second half. We're waiting, I think, a little bit on the Rams defense to play somebody to see if they were really this good, because the schedule of opposing offenses were the easiest in the NFL. But I think the Rams defense passed the test. Obviously, another big test, I believe, Monday night here against the Bucs coming up. But if you remove the Buffalo game, the Rams have given up less than 2.4 points per second half this season. Even with the Buffalo game in there where they allow 14, the Rams are allowing less than 3.7 points per game in the second half. So whatever adjustments Brandon Staley is making at halftime have been fantastic, and nobody's talking about it.
I do want to say one thing about the Seahawks, too. I was actually honestly, Payne, and I know it's going to be a counter-narrative or people may see this as a hot take, I was impressed with Seattle's defensive effort yesterday. It was the first time all season that Seattle's defense hadn't become the full-blown laughingstock, because you mentioned Brandon Staley and how well the Rams defense played. The game was, 23-13, and the Seahawks get 3 straight 3-and-outs from the Rams. I believe the Rams' final 3 drives covered a grand total of 21 yards, and I think that's part of the reason that the Seahawks offense has to bear the brunt of this. Sure, we can give the Rams defense credit, and they were outstanding, but Seattle offensively has to go out there and do something. When you finally get your defense to get stops and even create a short field or two towards the latter portion of the first half, just a weird game overall, because it started out quick and the game really died in the second half and looked like a good old-fashioned rock fight between these two teams.
The one thing that we had said about Seattle's defense was maybe this would be a matchup that's a little bit better for them, because you don't have these deep down the field imposing wide receiver threats. You have Jamal Adams, who can play around the box and impact a game like this and get pressure on Goff. Sure enough, I believe I saw him come in on a blitz from the outside, strip sacked Goff. They fell on it, and I believe and were able to recover that fumble. So it felt like a little bit of a better matchup for the Seattle defense. Tougher game, obviously, on Thursday night that we'll discuss, but you're spot on. In the second half, you're looking at a Rams offense, 3.6 yards per play, 41% success rate. Through the air, Jared Goff, 31% success rate in the second half, just one explosive pass. He's down his left tackle, Andrew Whitworth. That probably played a role a little bit late in that game as well. Overall, though, that's a tough guy to lose, especially when you're going against the Bucs defensive front here next week.
And we know how much Jared Goff loves pressure right up the middle in his face in a football game. So we'll see exactly how that game plan materializes for Monday. Payne, I'm not sure where I want to go here with bad. I mean, there's so many different ways. Do we make fun of the Eagles again and their ineptitude for yet seemingly the 100th week in a row, despite having superior talent to their opposition? Do we pick apart the Denver Broncos and Drew Lock, who finished that game against the Las Vegas Raiders with a -5 turnover ratio, including multiple interceptions in plus territory? Or do we make fun of the Tennessee Titans passing game, who's really bottomed out over the last 4 games? And even in comeback mode, you're still looking at Ryan Tannehill with just 25 combined completions, albeit in a win against the Bears, but couldn't do much coming back on Thursday night against the Colts.
We can touch on all of them. I'm here. It's Monday. Not much going on. But let's start with the Eagles. I'm a little closer to that situation. I'm just disappointed. The offense is just, at this point, bad. I've held out hope, and it's just not it's not working. I'm being probably too optimistic. I'm probably too close to that situation. Obviously, the Eagles at -3 were very sharp. Got as high as 5. Then there was some resistance there, but I believe it ultimately closed like a consensus 4. A couple 4s out there. Everyone was focused on the players for Philly that they were getting back offensively, and I expected a huge surge from that group. I really did. I left wildly disappointed with Doug Peterson in the game plan. He had 2 weeks to devise that game plan and prepare for a Giants defense that, it's candidly, it's improved. but they don't do anything overly dynamic. They play off coverage, they play zone. It's very simple. Like, you take what the Giants defense gives you and you don't throw up on yourself, and you probably have a decent game. Anytime Doug kept Wentz in the shotgun and it was a quick drop back pass and release, the Eagles moved the ball. But for some reason, like, Doug had this game plan where he was going to have Carson take deep drops, and they were going to use this, like, elongated play action, and they were going to, fake a pass before the actual pass. It wasn't needed. And it's not just because of the matchup, but I think you need Carson to get the ball out of his hands quickly. He feels like a thinker to me, an overthinker. Like, the less time he has the ball in his hands and he just needs to get it out, I think the better. So these, like, 1, 2, 3-step drops, find the guy, get it out, especially against zone. 5, 6, 7, 8 yards, keep the ball moving. Anytime they did that, it was fine. But it was a horrific game plan from Doug Peterson. Wildly disappointing effort from the Eagles offense. And I get that they're still sitting atop the division, right? Toughest Smurf for now, Todd. But to me, that was a must-win game. Because if you look at the schedule for Philly, they're on the road next week at Cleveland. Then they play Seattle. They're at Green Bay, the Saints, and they're at Arizona the next 5 games. 32-13, the record of those 5 teams. So this, to me, felt like a game out of the bye where you got healthier, that was in division, that you had to have, and the offense was non-existent.
You know what? One thing on that before you go into a couple of the other things, because I want to try and find a silver lining, I have to give the Giants credit. I mean, essentially, they're 3 points away from maybe being on a 5-game winning streak. You have a 1-point loss against Philadelphia on a Thursday night. You have the 2-point loss with the pass interference flag that was picked up against Tampa. 2 wins against Washington and now a win against the Eagles. I mean, you want to talk about a team that's trending in the right direction, so showing some fight. You have to give the Giants a little bit of credit, at least the way things stand now, for the hire of Joe Judge, because the group, both offensively and defensively, really seem to be rallying about it. And I think Logan Ryan's comments were pretty telling about the organization as a whole last week.
It feels a little more buttoned up. It feels like there is a direction. It feels like they're a little bit more prepared. I don't know what Joe Judge is. I honestly don't. It feels more of like a CEO type.
Nothing wrong with that. Bill Parcells
Nothing
got
wrong
to
with
work.
that. You hired the right defensive mind because the defense has improved. And let me be candid. I am not a fan of the Clapper, but he has certainly gotten more creative the last few weeks. I think he finally realized he needed to be. We're seeing end arounds. We're seeing more runs from Daniel Jones. I think Daniel Jones has looked pretty good, and I know a lot of people will bash him. Oh, if he was good, they could have beat the Bucs. Sure, he missed some throws in the Bucs game, but I mean, again, this guy doesn't have a ton of weapons, doesn't have the best offensive line. The ground game isn't fantastic. A lot has been stacked against him in the first year and a half, and I think he's got a shot. I truly do. In this game, 7.5 yards per pass play. Overall, the Giants' offense, 51% success rate. They're getting it done with like Wayne Gallman out there. So I was very impressed with what the Giants have done. They've been competitive in all these games, even the losses, as you alluded to. They're fighting. It looks like there's been full-blown buy-in there.
Hell of a lot better than what we saw from the Giants towards the latter portion of the past season when their entire defensive backfield looked like it was going to implode on them.
Yes, that is true. You go out, you get the signing of Bradbury, who your GM was familiar with and had drafted to Carolina, and then you sign Logan Ryan off the street. He seems to be helping. Just his presence there. I think he's a good player still, but just that veteran presence and a scheme fit at that. So they've improved in that back half.
Hey, you take what you can get. But the other ones, I mean, the Titans, Payne from an offensive standpoint, I know touched on it briefly there. And then, I don't know what to make of Denver at this point. I really don't.
Yeah, the Titans' offense hasn't been the best the last few weeks. I think we talked about it leading into the Colts game. It's been a very predictable offense from Arthur Smith. Just way too much running on early downs. Derrick Henry's just running into loaded boxes. So I just think there needs to be more creativity. You're hoping that a big game against Baltimore moving forward, you've had some extra time, that you at least figure out what you want to do on that side of the ball. Defensively, hopefully you're getting some help back. Adoree Jackson, you would think, is going to be back for the Baltimore game. We'll see there. But the offense hasn't been great, hasn't been in rhythm, just too predictable. In terms of Drew Lock and the Denver offense, I just don't know. it's another no-show. The O-line got abused by a below-average defensive front of the Raiders. And coming into that game, Las Vegas was dead last in defensive rush efficiency. Denver only had 3.5 yards a carry. Drew Lock was under a pressure bunch. And obviously you're never going to win a game turning it over 5 times. And you can take, I guess, 5 on a game, like when you're looking at these, but like 3 of those turnovers are not just like your garden variety turnover. It's one before the half in the end zone, which to me, we always talk about the momentum scores, and they're not as big in the NFL, but I still think they play a role. So if you don't throw the pick there, you can go into halftime up 13-10 it would have been. Instead, you're down 10-6, you give up points right out of the gate in the second half, and the game just kind of snowballs. But for 2.5 quarters there, it felt like the game was just waiting to be taken by Denver, and Drew Lock just threw up on himself consistently. I just don't think Drew Lock appears to be the guy at this point. And I know we had our doubts, Todd, coming into the season, but I think they're getting proven right now to be true. If you look, Lock, 39% success rate through the air. More interceptions than explosive passes yesterday. It was just ugly from their offense. And I don't know what to make of that game. I really don't, because that game was, to me, completely on the offense. I thought the Raiders weren't very good offensively. I thought Denver's defense did a decent job. They held the Raiders to 5.4 yards per play and a 45% success rate. We took 5 on that game. It closed 3. If you told me that's what the Raiders offense was doing, I'm feeling pretty damn good about it.
Yeah, you tell me Derek Carr is 152 yards passing, I would take in the Denver Broncos +5 and twice on Sunday.
Yeah, and it just wasn't the case because of Drew Lock and the poor decisions. It also doesn't look like he's 100% healthy. Something's bugging him.
Yeah,
so I don't know what that means for. Yes, the dance moves aren't very good. Should probably
fucking clown show over there. You win one game and come back against the Chargers, and you act like you won the Super Bowl.
Ooh, a little salty there.
I'm not salty with him. Hey, it is what it is. Denver has just shown a history of not drafting quarterbacks, and I'm very curious to see what direction they elect to go, because Paxton Lynch flamed out. We'll see if Drew Lock is ultimately the answer. I know he hasn't had all of his weapons at his disposal, but somewhere along the way, you have to try and figure out what's wrong with the organization as a whole as you try and peg offensive skill position players. And John Elway essentially tries to find his heir apparent to what was Peyton Manning, and then ultimately Denver's been at a loss at the quarterback position since then.
You would have thought that Elway learned the lesson, right? Because when he had Peyton Manning there, he was obviously a guy that could lead the offense. And this is even on hole 18 of his career, effectively. So he didn't have the best arm, never had the best arm, but he was able to manage things. And every route that Elway has gone, whether it was through the draft with some of the guys you've mentioned there, Paxton and now Drew Lock, even in free agency, when they signed Joe Flacco, what was the response? Oh, big arm. And that just seems to be like the kind of quarterback that he wants. You need someone that's got some sense about them. You need someone that's got a good enough arm but is accurate, can control an offense, can get guys involved. I just don't see that from Drew Lock right now. So I don't know what the direction is. And we kind of talked about this in the offseason. Like, hey, go get a veteran quarterback so the season isn't lost if Drew Lock isn't your guy. But we saw what the path they chose, and they didn't want to go get a Jameis Winston because it's probably too much pressure on Drew Lock. Because if Drew Lock fizzled at practice and you're watching Jameis Winston throw it all over the yard, the confidence of Drew Lock is going to get shot. So they didn't want to have competition there for the sake of Drew Lock's mental. And they could use a backup quarterback right now.
They might be able to use a lot of things. We'll see how Denver fares this weekend when they play host the Miami Dolphins, which I think gives us a good segue, Payne, to go from the good, the bad, and the ugly into some look-ahead lines, overreactions, underreactions, call them what you will in the betting market. And the first one is going to happen Thursday night, where the look-ahead number for Seattle had them listed as a 5.5-point favorite for the revenge date with the Arizona Cardinals. We know Seattle a little bit more banged up than when this number originally opened. FanDuel now has the Seahawks as a 3.5-point favorite, that number trending closer to 3.
Will be interesting to see where this ultimately settles and what ends up being the side. We talk about these short week games all the time, favoring the home team a little bit. Now, obviously not a ton of travel, but still some travel there. Seattle threw up on themselves in Arizona, had a double-digit lead and threw that one away. You mentioned that Seattle's defense showed some signs of life as guys got a little bit healthier this past week against the Rams. So for me, as we sit here at 3, I certainly couldn't take Arizona at this point.
No, so, I mean, if you do, I guess it just says that Seattle's done and buried in terms of their competitive balance in the NFC West.
Yes, that, if you're taking Arizona here, it's more of a passing of the guard, so to speak. That'd be the only way at 3 that you could take Arizona, because to me the number has some value here if you're looking at Seattle. But sitting here Monday morning, haven't broken down all the X's and O's or haven't dug into all the potential injuries. I know by Thursday when we break this down, we'll have a little bit more of a comprehensive take.
Cleveland Browns, currently a 3-point favorite. You do have to lay $1.20 at FanDuel as they'll play host to the Philadelphia Eagles. Number even out to 3.5 at some locations. Look ahead price here had Cleveland listed as a modest 2-point favorite.
Yes. I don't know what to make of Philadelphia at this point. I truly don't. And what's interesting about this game is if you're looking at Cleveland, you're looking at some of their metrics, they're going to be suppressed by what has gone on the last 2 games against the Raiders and then yesterday against the Texans with 30-mile-an-hour winds, gusts up to 50, rain. The metrics aren't going to look good for Cleveland here. And we're kind of seeing that with the total this morning. Went from 45, we're now out to 47.5, 48. I think that is probably the right move. We'll have to see what the weather looks like because there is some in the forecast and there's like this front that looks like it could potentially be there, but we'll have to monitor the weather situation. But so far, at least I agree with the total move. Now we've gone through some key numbers here, so I wouldn't be running into this at 47.5, 48 now. But I can certainly see the case that was made for this over based upon Cleveland's suppression of their offense with these weather games recently.
Indianapolis Colts, where there will be no weather. They'll welcome in the Green Bay Packers on Sunday. You've seen a flip of favorites here. Green Bay goes from a 2.5-point favorite in the look-ahead numbers to the Colts, a 1.5-point favorite right now at FanDuel. But why is that important? Because you do have some of the sharpest shops in the world, 2.5, one even popped to 3.
Holy Toledo. As we were on this call, I don't disagree with the move. Holy yeah. The total also got hit this morning, and that makes some sense. Again, some suppression with Green Bay totals in the last few home games with some wind and weather there, now getting to play some complimentary ball indoors. The potential for Alan Lazard to return. I know he had practiced this past week, still very sore with the core muscle, but potentially out there for the Packers offense. Indianapolis, as we have long discussed and talked about, they can move the ball. The only 2 games they haven't been able to move the ball is against 2 top 5 defenses. That is not the Green Bay Packers. We'll also have to monitor the situation of Jair Alexander. He missed yesterday. Jake Luton had a slew of guys running open in the secondary and missed him, whether it was the rain or the wind or whatever it was, but DJ Chark was wide open on a deep ball. There was another seam pass that he just missed. Phillip Rivers is going to be able to take advantage of those things. I think when you look at this game matchup-wise, and maybe a game that we discuss, I would think it's a game that will make the card for Thursday.
I think it definitely cracks our Thursday rotation.
Yeah, so we won't go too far into this, but Green Bay, the way they play defensively, struggles a little bit to defend some running backs and tight ends, and that's kind of where the Colts operate. So
this game I don't think will crack our Thursday rotation unless things drastically change. But you've seen Denver from a pick'em on the look-ahead number at FanDuel now out to a 2.5-point underdog as the Miami Dolphins put their 3-game winning streak with their franchise quarterback on the line in altitude.
Is this the same handicap as the Chargers this past weekend? 2 guys walk into a bar.
I'm not sure you can give that full joke rendition here with mixed company. I don't know if that'll endear all of us to our loyal listeners.
Well, so, I mean, just one of these teams, the Miami Dolphins, is buttoned up. They are coached extremely well. Now, there isn't value in this number. I don't know where it's going to go. If it gets to 3, is there going to be some buy-in on Denver? Possibly, just because the number makes sense. I'm just not sure what Denver is. I don't know what their offense is. And I'm not sure they're going to be able...
Not very good is the answer, Payne. Not very good is the answer.
Right. And so those are some of the concerns. Is Drew Lock 100% healthy? If you go back and listen to that game again, he's kind of out there like late in the second quarter, putzing around, doesn't look like he's fully healthy. Even the announcers are saying, hey, or they think they're going to make a switch at halftime. So we'll have to monitor some of those situations. But the Dolphins right now are playing buttoned up. You have a very accurate quarterback. Defensively, scheme-wise, there are, heck, Todd, maybe 1 or 2 guys, at least scheme-wise, that you would have potentially over Brian Flores. Every single week, it's a different game plan for Brian Flores. He's been fantastic with how he chooses to attack opposing offenses. It's really fun to watch because you don't know. It's one of the few coaches that I've watched down here in Miami, because typically I can tell you what these coaches are going to do. Very rarely do I know what Brian Flores is going to do defensively. Every week it's something different, and that could give Drew Lock some trouble. But again, the number doesn't necessarily say there's value in Miami here.
All right, we have one order of business, piece of business to get done. As you can tell, I've been in a lovely mood the entire show, so hopefully that hasn't carried through. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And the Monday Nighter, Payne, between the Vikings and Bears. We're looking at Minnesota, a 3.5-point favorite at FanDuel. Total on this game sits at 44. Two quarterbacks that know each other all too well. And I actually didn't realize that Nick Foles had spent the early portion of his college career in East Lansing fighting for a job at Michigan State. So these guys go way, way back. You look at the Minnesota Vikings, and it hasn't exactly been great in this rivalry for them. They've now lost 4 straight games to the Chicago Bears. They've struggled at Soldier Field, losing 14 of 17 since the stadium went through its renovations way back in 2003. The Bears have covered 5 out of the last 6 in the series. The underdog has covered 5 out of the last 6 overall. The highest scoring game in the last 8 meetings between these teams, 48 points. And when you look at the Bears, for as much as they've struggled, they've been very good in the division. 10-3 straight up, 9-4 against the spread. I give you all of that to let you tell me that the Bears offense, with a change in play calling, can at least pose a legitimate threat against this Vikings defense.
Possibly.
That didn't sound optimistic.
This is... It can't get worse. This is probably the trickiest primetime game of the season we've had so far, Todd. If you're looking at, these two teams and how they're trending and how they're playing recently, your gut probably says Minnesota rolls here. And we both know and have seen that Minnesota at 2.5 is sharp. Even some money line at minus 145. That Minnesota is the sharp side. Heck, even at 3, there was a small buy on Minnesota after that coaching change you mentioned came to fruition. It's going to be interesting at 3.5 to see how much resistance it is, because inevitably there's someone, and probably rightly so, that says the look-ahead game on this was Chicago minus 2.5. I can now get 3.5. There's just way too much value here to pass up. And I think we will see a better effort from the Bears offense. I think we see more 12 personnel. You go out, you sign Jimmy Graham, you spend draft capital on Cole Kmet, and you've only run 2 tight end sets 16% of the time. It doesn't really make much sense. And I know Matt Nagy has said that he was effectively going to fall on his sword, and he was going to go down with the ship, and he was going to call plays. There must have been something that went on this week that he said, hey, I'm probably not doing the best for this team, and I'm going to turn to Bill Lazor. And I think Bill Lazor has shown the ability to be a very good play caller. Now, he's only had about 72 hours here, but I would fully expect heavier sets, especially if Cole Kmet is 100%. I think that you're going to see a ton of 12 personnel here. And when you look at the Bears, their success rate through the air is 28% better throwing from 2 tight end sets than it is 3 wides. I think you're also going to see a little bit better of a connection with Nick Foles and understanding who Nick Foles is in this game. Early down RPO throws. Nick has been great with that. He won a Super Bowl doing that. And if you look at this matchup, the Vikings defense has been bad defending early down RPOs. Since Foles took over as the starter right now, the Bears offense, 69% passing success rate on early down throws using RPOs. Over that same stretch, the Vikings defense allowing 75% success rate on early down RPO throws. So it just feels like the matchup is a little bit better here. Without David Montgomery, maybe we don't try to establish a ground game that's never going to be there. And we start using the pass game as a little bit more of a complement, right? The short pass game on early downs, that can be your ground game. So I think we're going to see a little bit better Chicago offense. Now, part of this move is there's some stuff going along the offensive line, some injuries, some COVID situations. Allen Robinson is a game-time decision, not 100%. He's a tough guy. He has already overcome a doubtful label this season, which, if you look in the history of these labels, like, doubtful is less than a 5% chance to play. So he's already overcome one of those. I think Cole Kmet probably battles through some things and is out there, but I just think we're going to see at least a directionally better Chicago offense. But I understand the thought process, right, Todd? When you look at this, like, oh my God, they made this change 72 hours before the game. There's going to be some dysfunction here. They're heading into a bye week. That's when you would make a change like this. But I just think it was absolutely needed.
Yeah, sometimes you need a shake-up and you need a little change in voice in the room to make sure that teams know exactly what's going on and that you're not going to maintain the status quo, which in the Bears' case has been downright awful. The question that I have, Payne, do the Vikings have the pieces to make life that difficult for the Bears offense? I mean, you look at what their numbers are this season. I mean, they're giving up nearly 290 yards per game. Their quarterback rating allowed is 28th, and they just don't bring pressure. With no Danielle Hunter, the Bears offensive line that was a problem against the Tennessee Titans, who also hadn't brought pressure, you would think could have a puncher's chance today against Minnesota's defensive front.
Yeah, I think that's probably, the thought process and the saving grace is that the Minnesota Vikings pressure rated, they get to quarterbacks about 19% of the time. And that Foles is going to have some time in the pocket to operate. And I think that's probably going to be the case. I just think that there's going to be a little bit better understanding of what Chicago is good at offensively, and more of that is going to be implemented. And this isn't some great Vikings defense. And you mentioned this at the top, is that Chicago has owned this series. Under Matt Nagy, they have won all 4 of these games. And those are against far better iterations of Vikings defenses than the one that's going to be on the field tonight. So, again, the matchups, the price doesn't necessarily align with what the sharp guys have done in this game, but I really respect that money. And you really have to respect that this is a multi-tiered move. And so that's kind of what is scaring me off the Bears here, obviously, because it isn't just a move early in the week at 2.5. It's a midweek move on the money line at -145. It's still taking and laying the 3 with Minnesota. I mean, it is a sign of a very big position here, and that's what is keeping me off so far. Because even past this, Todd, you think about this, right? It's like, you look at the matchup a little bit. Delvin Cook, he's played in 3 of the 4 matchups against this Bears defense in recent years. He's got 86 total rushing yards in those games. If you look at how Chicago, the one thought that we had defensively for them was like, they're a little vulnerable against the run. And they shut down Tennessee's ground game last week. They've had a history of shutting down Delvin Cook. Cousins in prime time hasn't been the best. Cousins, not at home, not the best. Cousins in a night game, not the best. The Vikings dramatically worse on the road, outdoors, away from the dome, not the best. So that's what's really interesting about this game to me. I am at this point going to be just an observer. I did, however, see, as we were about to record this morning, a little nibble on the over at 43.5.
It's that good old contrarian angle. We saw a little bit of that seemingly come in last Monday night for the Jets and Patriots. Everyone wondered how the Jets were going to be able to score. They went out there and put up a crooked number. New England was forced to match, and that game went flying over. I'm not quite sure I have that level of optimism for the Bears and what they can do on the offensive side, but you're not asking for a team to do a whole heck of a lot. If you can get to 20 in a game where the road favorite is being bet, it probably ultimately gets you there. And it's interesting you raise all those points because we know what Dalvin Cook has done, kind of performing on another level right now. Nearly 500 yards from scrimmage and 6 touchdowns over the last 2 games. Ran for a career high last weekend against the Detroit Lions. But the Lions and Packers, hey, let's not sugarcoat it. They're nowhere close to the Chicago Bears. And I think you brought up the biggest point of all, that we had some skepticism about how the Bears were going to be able to perform against the physically imposing ground game, and they held Derrick Henry in check, 21 carries, 68 yards, and most impressively, Derrick Henry did not have a single broken tackle in that entire football game. So if
I
you're
didn't
the
know that.
Yeah,
that's impressive.
If you're the Bears, you do everything you can to take away Dalvin Cook. Easier said than done. And you go, hey, Kirk Cousins, if you're going to bring the Vikings in here and win this football game, it's all going to fall on your shoulders with Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and maybe a little bit of tight end play.
Yeah, I completely agree there. And obviously that's kind of been the strength of the Chicago defense to this point. 4th in defensive pass efficiency. They've played a very good schedule of offenses too, top 10 in that regard. So that will probably be the game plan as it's been for the past few years, right? Let's try to negate and remove Dalvin Cook from this game and force Kirk Cousins to beat us, and we think he'll eventually make a mistake because that's what he's done in the past. So that's why this game to me is just so intriguing. Again, I wish I had a little bit more on it, but I don't at this point.
No, it's a game I think that the market tells you one thing, all of your fundamental handicapping concepts tell you something different. And as we tell, all of our loyal listeners out there, it's okay to pass on a football game from time to time when you feel like you're backed into a corner. Live betting is always a great option. FanDuel gives you plenty of ways to get involved in the game and encourage folks to take advantage if you don't have a bet before things kick off. Anything else, Payne, you'd like to share with our loyal legions of listeners before we take a little 72-hour break and reconvene on Thursday with a couple of attractive games to highlight that Sunday slate? And also, side note, we will cover the Bucs and Rams on Thursday's podcast with a holiday week next week, no Monday podcast.
Yes, I forgot about that. You're spot on. No, that's it. Let's get out of Dodge. We'll be back on the NFL side Thursday. Schedule looks pretty good here. Knock on wood. Some nice games for the Sunday slate, and then obviously the Monday nighter as well.
Keep our fingers crossed. Best of luck to all of you with whatever investment choices you choose to make on tonight's game between the Bears and Vikings. We'll be back with you on Thursday, as Payne mentioned. And the interim, hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.